Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Dr. HR. In today's session, we wish to talk about organization culture transformation stories.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that culture is important and that leaders today recognize that. And I think sort of into your question, the real key is how much do they want to make it important and to actually live it through the day-to-day workings of the company? And I think in the numbers-driven society we have today, Neil, you've got to go with KPIs, but not necessarily like employee surveys, which are so generic and often they're misleading. Tying in specific metrics, such as there are programs that are out there now where you can actually look at how often your employees contribute into the intranet or your internal chat systems of your company. That's important. How often are your employees actually posting on social media about different facets of how they enjoy your company and why it's such a great company to work at? How often is that actually going out? That's important to measure. Linguistics are important to measure. When people are chatting or texting or when they're doing emails in the company, what's the tone of the words they're using? Is there any shaming, blaming, name-calling, hostility? If there's a difference of opinion, does the content change? Does the tone change in emails and other communication? It's so important to measure things like that, and there's software out there to do that. The other thing I think is very important too is tying in, making sure employees know and managers know as well for their groups or their divisions that compensation and bonuses and reviews in part are going to be based on the behaviors that are shown to not only reflect company core values, but also good personal core values as well. So I think tying it into reviews, tying culture metrics, KPIs that you develop into compensation, and then I think just recognizing that there has to be overall accountability, which is something that we definitely do with our program at Walking the Ridge. You've got to have that accountability. People have to know that it's expected. Well, that's the real test, right? I mean, everything is easy to do when times are good. But when times are bad, what's really happening, right? There's an old saying, you squeeze a lemon, what comes out? Lemon juice. You squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice. You start squeezing people, what comes out? Well, genuinely what's within them. And if that's stress, frustration, anger, or if that's happiness and kindness and tolerance, you're going to see that coming out when people are squeezed. So when you start having pullbacks, which we're seeing all over now, especially with COVID and our economic pullbacks around the world, the first thing that's very important to do between leadership and the rest of the company is to make sure there are the two T's. That is trust and transparency. And I'll give you a good example. So I have friends that are in the healthcare system here in the United States. And right now, one of the biggest things that's happening in hospitals is there's a big financial pullback. And what is happening is leadership is really being tested on culture, Neil, because good leaders are reaching out to their employees through the intranet, and they're actually being honest with them about what's happening. I recognize what's happening on the front lines in our departments, in our organization. And I want to let you know it's not being missed. We're not just being squeezed in the boardroom. We really empathize and recognize what's happening on the front line. So just know we're there with you. And then secondly, we want to hear your feedback as employees of the company. In other words, we really want you to contribute and brainstorm ideas on where we can start cutting back, essentially, to help the company through this tough time. Because people not only want to feel valued in terms of being heard, right? but people want to feel valued in terms of being real contributors and being trusted to be contributors. So this is where culture, I think, it really buckles down in times of tightness, Anil, is the way leaders respond in being transparent and in being really trusting and having people genuinely feel that. Right now, there's really a gap that's being identified more today than ever, in that companies have core values. They're certainly on paper. They're certainly on our wonderful wall posters, right? With the icebergs and the hands shaking together and all that sort of thing. But when people are first hired, they're given the core values, and perhaps even the hiring agents in HR or in talent management will give some tests to see how well do these people's core values line up with our company values at the time of hiring. It's not often followed up on. In other words, once the person's hired, then they come into the company. It's almost like a de facto expectation, like, okay, because they have these core values, then they're just going to behave like this on a regular basis because these are their values and they match up. Well, that doesn't take into consideration that people fluctuate. They fluctuate based on stress at home, stress on the workplace, leadership style, management style. So I think enough is not being done to follow people once they are hired in the company, Anil, on their quote unquote employee journey. And then to identify, hey, listen, when we hired you, we found these core values matched up with ours, but your behavior is not mirroring that. So what do we need to do to address this right here and now, as opposed to letting it just go on or not even looking at it at all? Do you follow what I'm saying? It's sort of like it's a moment-based thing where core values match up in the hiring, but it's not often tracked. And the first point of that is, and I'd like to answer further, but how do you feel about that? No, I'd like to know how you feel about that, just to get your thought about the difference in matching up personal and company core values during hiring versus, thereafter tracking them through the course of employment and perhaps maybe empowering employees that might be falling short.
Yeah, I think that is the missing link. In fact, if both of that can be addressed, I'm sure, there would be plenty of success stories around, culture transformation.
A lot of people don't know their personal core values.
Sure.
One of the things that we do in our program, Walking the Ridge, is when people go through the learning portion of the program, the program has a couple different portions. One's learning, the other's accountability, that's shared every day in the practice. And then the third is people and employee data that we're able to pull for companies. But in the learning process, we make personal core values a whole segment of what people not only learn, but we give them exercises, not only where they have to identify them themselves, but we encourage them to reach out to people, friends, family, and people in the company, and have them answer the questions. What are my personal core values? And then slide them the sheet and let them answer and let them know I'm not going to be upset however you answer. What do you think I'm strong in and weak in terms of personal core values? A lot of times people think they know their core values, right? And it may sound good. Yeah, I'm a good leader. I'm really empathetic. I'm a great listener. And all of a sudden you hand those off to your family or to your friends and they go, yeah, you're not really that good of a listener. I wouldn't put that as one of your strengths. And it's important to do that sort of work. Sure. Because people oftentimes presume to know what their core values are. It's one of the things we address in Walking the Ridge, and I think it's very important for people to get in touch and really sort of flush out what's true for them with themselves and how they're perceived by others. That is the underpinning of the entire Walking the Ridge program. It is all grounded in civility. And by that, I mean the way people treat one another, not just day to day when things are going well, but how do you treat, engage, and behave with other people, during cubicle chats, during emails, texts, office meetings. How do you engage when people have differences of opinion, when people have real disagreements on all sorts of matters, or, maybe when something bad happens, how does one person react and then bring that into their workplace relationship? Civility is huge. It is an undercurrent that is largely unaddressed in companies. A lot of times when people come in and they're hired, companies will say, okay, well, here are our policies. You're expected when you come in to blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great legally. You've got the legalistic jargon down for your company. But most people have never taken real training and real development on the interpersonal, intrapersonal skills, dialogue techniques to be used when it comes to civility. So for example, if you and I, let's say, are working in HR, Anil, and we have a difference of opinion about a key employee, and you think it's time for them to go, and I think it's time, and I think, no, it's not time for them to go. We just need to do this and this and this, help them go for, and we have a disagreement. And it becomes emotional because that often happens, right? When there's a disagreement, it's not just a disagreement in content, it's a disagreement with emotion. If I know how to de-escalate that emotion so that we can work towards a resolution, but take the emotion out of it, because I have a skill set called Imago, I-M-A-G-O, which is one of the things we teach in Walking the Ridge. I can help diffuse that moment, perhaps without you even knowing it, and make a better resolution. That's one conversation, Anil. Now imagine in a company of 5,000 people, imagine 1,000 or 10,000 of those angry, potentially inflammatory exchanges or conversations, face-to-face or digitally, happening every month. And start multiplying that cumulatively and start recognizing, when you start looking at your Glassdoor rankings, when you start looking at retention, when you start looking at, culture surveys, there's a lot to how people engage every day. And if they have skills to really do it, if they don't, then we can't slip into the de facto presumption that people will just be professional. Professional is a very broad word. And we can even see here in the United States, you look at business and political leaders, and you certainly know the way they behave and they act. They may have 10 letters and degrees behind their name and lots of experience, but if they can't control their emotions and the way they treat other people, it's going to really have an impact in business results and relationships. So civility is huge. It's largely undertaught. And I think, frankly, that most people want to be more confident, they want to be less stressed, and they want to contribute more into workplace conversations, but they don't because either leaders might be too narcissistic or not show enough empathy, or they might feel they're treated poorly. They might be afraid to enter into a conversation because they've got a lot to contribute, but they don't want to get their head chewed off. And all of that starts to get better when there's underlying civility improvements within an entire organization. And it doesn't happen from the top down with what we do, Anil. It happens from the bottom up. It happens by empowering every employee to have real skills and understanding on how to be better. And then they contribute that, like a day-to-day practice, like yoga, like playing a game of golf. They practice these things each and every day, and they get better at them. And that's what we mean by walking the ridge, is that human practice of skills and techniques around being more civil.
We are saying whether it is personal relation or it is, working in a business kind of organization setup, there are no win-lose or lose-win kind of a proposition. If you really want to better or strengthen the relations, then definitely the civility element would definitely bring in win-win kind of a proposition in organization, and hence should be given much more importance.
Yeah. Look, Dale Carnegie said it best years ago. Human beings are creatures of emotion. I don't care if you're the CEO. I don't care if you're, the sanitation worker at a company. It doesn't matter. Interactions and relationships, trust and belonging are not just de facto. They don't just happen because they're on company policy paper. They happen because they really happen and people feel them. People want to feel good about how they communicate, about their workplace relationships, and they want to feel good. And a lot of that comes from the quality of the way people interact. Civility is just an essential component, especially when we disagree or have a difference of opinion. It's necessary to have as a backdrop. If you don't have it, your car might be running on fumes. You might be driving a Ferrari on paper, but when you engage with people, you might be sputtering and running on fumes. And it does impact companies, no doubt about it.
Well said, Steve.
Wow. That's a great question. That is an amazingly insightful question. And it is so spot on. Somewhere, somehow, we seem to have forgotten in the corporate world that people leave the office. And when they leave the office, they go back into their personal lives, and not everybody's personal life and not everybody's engagements within their personal life are happy ones. People have stress. People have challenges. People may come to work and be the biggest smiler all day long. They may go home and they may have a terrible marriage, or they may have issues with their parents, or they may have financial issues they're stressed with. So it's important to recognize that lots of people come in, and first of all, to know whether or not they genuinely have their game face on or not, it's important to tool them up. And again, that's what we do with Walking the Ridge. We give people the tools so that they're going to wear these tools, these techniques, these better understanding of their personal core values. We give them exercises. We give them real-world application improvements to make. And they can insert this not just at work, Anil, but in their personal life, in their community life, and when they go online. That's really important, because you got to be carrying your improvement throughout your life, like a 360 review on an employee. People have a 360 life, and the difference is, if you want the most out of your employees, then you want them to be genuinely trusting, belonging, and giving. And that comes when you've really given them the tools to do so, and then you've encouraged accountability. I know we've talked about this off this interview. One of the things we do, people think it's a little strange at first, but with the learning that we provide and the program we provide, we actually give everybody one of these. Every single viewer gets a wristband. Now, you don't have to wear the wristband, right? You can put it on your computer terminal. You can put it at home if you're working from home right next to your computer. But what it does is, because it's part of the Walking the Ridge program to have this, it's an anchor. And that's important, not just for yourself, but when you're, let's say, wearing the wristband on your wrist, and you might be offensive to somebody, and somebody says, "Whoa, Anil, I thought we were walking the ridge here." All of a sudden, you've got a checkable moment between employees right there that doesn't become animosity for 6 months. It doesn't become an HR reportable event. It becomes something that can potentially be managed between employees right then and there and improved upon. So, yes, game face, It is much more common than leaders or managers may want to realize. And it's the reason why not just empowering people through learning and development, but really having a beacon of accountability that's shared in the company, it is absolutely key so that people have an awareness that this is not just you're watching something and you're done. This is, we're inserting it into our day-to-day working so that it has to be real. And the expectation is real, not just from management and leadership down, Anil, but the expectation is real between employees. And I think that sort of accountability is what's missing today.
So, Steve, with that, we come to the conclusion of today's session. And I could not thank you more for your generosity, for your patience, for spending time with my viewers. And from Dr. HR, thanks a ton. And I promise we will catch up again and we would have interesting conversation related to culture. Thank you again for your time and you take care.
Thank you, Anil. Great being here and thanks for having me.